I just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. You know, I grew up on some acreage. I grew up with horses, and we used to do some crazy and often stupid things, you know, as kids, bareback riding and slapping horses around. I've been bucked off a horse more than once. I've also fallen off because, well, if you've ridden, you understand it can happen, right? You gotta stay in that saddle if you got one. But today's guest has some experiences in the saddle, and she uses those to sort of teach us some bigger lessons. And I think there are a lot of great analogies out there when you start talking, nature and riding and these sorts of things. So this is a fun one. I want to show you a book. It's called Pray, Trust, Ride, and it is by today's guest, Lisa Boucher. And she's got some little Old West sort of lessons. At least I imagine it that way. We Americans, we fantasize, about the Old West. Yellowstone's one of the biggest shows right now, and so we all got kind of this idea, but it's a hard life. It's rough, and it kind of parallels life, because life can buck you off if you're not careful. You got to learn to ride and stay in that saddle. Lisa, how are you doing? Great to have you on Life Today Live.
I'm well, Randy. Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, if we're going to talk about you as a cowgirl, you got to give us a little bit of background. What makes you a cowgirl?
All right. So, like yourself, I grew up with horses. My first riding experience, my mother used to give me $7 to ride my bike down to take piano lessons, and I would just keep on going most of the time. And there was a dairy farm not too far from there that had also boarded horses. And so I fell in love with this little Shetland pony, Polly, and I would chase her around in the field and find a rock or a stump and just get on her back. And while she's grazing, I'm just sitting on this horse, this pony, this little Shetland pony.
Yeah.
So that really started my love affair with horses. And then eventually, when my parents, I guess, saw that it wasn't just a phase of I want a pony, and after some experiences with other horses that weren't great, I ended up getting my own quarter horse and did the 4-H thing. And it was a wonderful time. And I had an idyllic place to ride, acres and acres. That is all we were talking before the show, build up now. But it was a beautiful place to ride. And so that started my love affair with it. And then I ended up getting married and have always lived in the suburbs, and I have twin boys, and they were involved in sports and all that. So it was just a lot easier to live close to their school, close to their sports. But the whole horse thing never went away, that love of riding. So once my sons were raised, I started to look into ranches out west in Wyoming and Montana. And so I started going on cattle drives. And the first one, some of the stories, in fact, all of the stories in the book are true, like things that happened on these cattle drives. The first one, I was totally unprepared for what I was actually getting into. Because though I'd ridden my whole life, the terrain in Ohio is very, very different from the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming.
Sure.
And so it was challenging, to say the least. It was so much fun, but it was exhausting. I went out there to help. Literally, it was not a dude ranch. It was a working cattle ranch. And there used to be a coalition of 25 ranchers, and their numbers had dwindled down to 9. So they really did need people to come help them bring the cattle in. And so that was the week that I was out there, and we were spending 12, 14 hours in the saddle some days. I mean, it was no joke. I went in June. It snowed one day. It was bitterly cold. It was the elements and then you've got the runoff from the mountains. So I was not prepared for the heights, and I was not prepared for the raging rivers that we crossed. and things like that. And it really was, I correlate that with, as you mentioned, staying in the saddle. We've got to ride it out sometimes through life.
Yeah.
My instinct was, okay, I'm done with this. But I wasn't there as a guest, and they're not going to cater to, I'm cold, I'm done. No, my only choice was, you're in it for the long haul and you're just going to suck it up, Buttercup, and you're going to ride it out. And that's what I did. And I think that's what we have to do sometimes in life, is we've just got to ride through those hard places.
Yeah, I know we like to sort of make that sort of thing, movie-esque, and it's not easy. I mean, that's some of the hardest work I think someone could do. Do they still do that? Do you know?
They do, because with the ranches that I've been to now, the guy at this first ranch, he passed away. So that ranch closed, but I was at another ranch in Montana in August, this past August.
Oh, wow.
And they're still doing all their work on horseback. Some ranchers may use ATVs and whatnot, but the terrain really does pretty much dictate that you're going to use horses still, because once you start getting higher elevations and whatnot. So, for example, we rode for 5 hours just so they could mend some fences, and we could check on a calf that had broken its leg to make sure that it was still nursing. So horseback, is essential for their way of life. And I think the numbers have dwindled, sadly, but there is a lot of ranchers that are using horses and dogs. We did see several that I know in Wyoming, where one rancher, we were up on a high ridge looking down, and it was an incredible sight. He must have about like maybe 100 head of cattle, which is not a huge herd. And he signaled that, he didn't really need help, but he was working that herd with 2 dogs.
That's wild.
And it was incredible. So yeah, that is the way of life in many areas. I know like the whole Yellowstone thing is really real, because there's land grabs going on. The rancher was telling me some of the hipsters from the coast are moving in. Yeah. They're not as respectful of that way of life, and they don't want you riding on their land or this, that, and the other. And it's causing a lot of problems, a lot of bitterness, actually. And Bozeman is the city. I was outside of Bozeman, and the ranchers do not like how it's growing so fast. They hate it to be.
Yeah,
I was in Clyde, Montana, which is still an itty bitty little town, but about an hour out of Bozeman. But they really do. They don't like what some people call progress.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. And there's a beauty to just being out there and working. It is hard work. Now, for you personally, when did the ride get rough?
Well, I think the ride got really rough in my own life. I'm assuming you're asking was when I got sober back in 89. So that started a journey. I don't know that, I guess I should take that back. It was a little rough the few years before that, between 27 and 29, somewhere around there, my late 20s, when I realized my life was not going in the right direction, and I was spinning my wheels. And a few examples: when you're in and out of college for a decade and you still don't have a degree, there's something wrong. So it was these kind of things I had to look. I was already married and divorced by the time I'm 21. That I knew it was going to be a disaster, but I did it anyway, because I look back now and I felt I was rather trapped. I came from a home that my mother was alcoholic. My father was a rageaholic. So there was a lot of that I was trying to escape, I think. So it was rough. I think probably my roughest years were growing up, and not for my horse. I think I would have ended up a teenage addict. But that horse really did save me and kept me going in a direction that wasn't too hateful. So as I'm progressing through my 20s, the outside always looked okay, and I think we can fool ourselves. But internally, I was falling apart. My spirituality, I was bankrupt. I was just really a lost soul. And so I I think it's by the grace of God, quite honestly, because most people don't quit drinking in their late 20s like I did, when nothing else really. I mean, like I said, if you looked at we tend to compare our lives from the outside in. And I was married at the time to a professional. We're still married. We didn't have our kids yet. So our life was, we were both working. I was working in advertising and marketing, and we come home and we go to dinner and we have drinks and we socialize. And so life looked pretty normal, like a lot of other people's lives at that age. But I just knew deep down, by then my mother finally was getting the right help that she needed. And she was 7 years sober, and she started to whisper in my ear that, your drinking seems to be look like it's escalating. And I chose to listen to her, which to me, that is still a miracle, because most people don't listen and they have to find out the hard way and drag themselves through years and decades of just misery. Yeah. And maybe because I saw what that looked like for my mother, that when I just knew that my drinking was escalating, I chose to nip it in the bud, and I started going to 12-step meetings, and here I am 33 years later, still sober. So something worked. But in that sobriety journey is when I reconnected with the spirituality. I was raised Catholic. And as much as I'm back in the Catholic Church and I do love it, there are things about it I wish they'd change a little bit, because they don't really help us get that personal relationship with God. And I had to find that on my own. I really didn't learn that through the church. That was probably one of the most challenging journeys, and it still is, because I think we all grapple with, what is God's will for my life? Sure. And I don't always know what God's will is for me, but I know what it's not. It's not for me to go back living the way I was living back in my 20s. I know God doesn't want that for me. I know he wants me to be a sober example in my family. We still have a lot of active addiction with my siblings, and hopefully not my kids, but they have the genetic predisposition. I did give them coping skills, which is something I didn't have. So I hope if they ever have an issue in their life, that they don't turn to the easier solution of self-medicating, and will just work through it. Yeah.
So let me ask, but do you think that the addiction was the result strictly of a genetic predisposition? Or you mentioned that you were running from some things. Was it the root problem, or was it a symptom of a deeper problem?
I think it's a symptom of something. I mean, I'm also a registered nurse. So working in the field, I started to do a lot of unofficial surveys of my own. And the people rolling through the doors of the emergency room, I worked in a level 1 trauma center for years. Wow. and then psych. So I've seen a lot. And when I read a lot of these charts, I started to put 2 and 2 together. Childhood trauma. I had childhood trauma, with a mother that was literally non-functional for too many years. She was so sick and tried to find help. My father took her all over to notable psychiatrists, therapists, hospitals, and they kept misdiagnosing her as bipolar and all this other garbage, when in actuality, she was an alcoholic, and her addiction started with Valium. So that was, Big Pharma's first $1 billion drug, and they marketed it to women for anxiety, for depression, for having too many kids. My mom, there's 4 of us. And so that's what started her addiction. So I think my addiction, and I look at my siblings, all of us have turned to substances. And I think it's because, number one, we were not taught coping skills. Number 2, we grew up, I can think of the predominant childhood emotion that I can recall from what I can recall of my childhood was fear. So I was in numerous car accidents with my mother. So it was fear of getting in the car, going anywhere, because she was always drunk or on the pills, and we wrecked a lot. my father raging, her falling on the floor, not being able to parent. So we kind of raised ourselves. And I mean, looking at that, we all turned out pretty good because, most of us are educated and we have jobs and we're functioning, but I'm the only one that got sober.
Okay. So your siblings still struggle with it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they do.
Your career path has been unusual, to say the least.
Yes.
You mentioned you're a registered nurse, but you've also trained horses. You've been a flight attendant. You've been a hairdresser and a bartender.
Right.
Is that just the way it went? Because I mean, I know plenty of people that have kind of hopped around from, job to job or career to career, or was that a part of a dissatisfaction or running, or what does that play
I think
in?
you nailed it right there. It was that was all pre sobriety. So I was just searching, running. The flight attendant job was great because I didn't have a regular schedule. It was somewhat chaotic. And that was what I felt normal. That was my normal. And so I didn't really start drinking excessively or heading down that path until we moved back from Dallas. And I tried to fly for a while. I was based in Denver for a while, but my commute was Dayton, Ohio, driving to the Cincinnati airport, getting on an airplane just to get to work, to go to Denver. So during ski season, it was a disaster. And the way they'd cancel flights and weight imbalance and it was just way too hard. So I eventually resigned after a few months. I don't know, maybe 3-4 months of giving it a fair shot. It just was not working. I'd be sitting in the Denver airport and here comes a snowstorm. And now I'm not going to get home for another day, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I think all of that. And then when I got sober, very early, I was a couple months sober. I'm sorry, when I found out I was pregnant with my twins. And so I have these babies. I'm still sober, but in new sobriety. But the reality of, oh my God, I've been a college student for 10 years. I'm very well-rounded though, but, that doesn't help put food on the table. I thought, I'm married to an attorney, but who knows if this marriage is going to last the way things are. So I thought I need to do something that I can put food on the table for my kids. And so I hate to say it, but that is the only reason I went to nursing school. I didn't have this desire to save people, but I knew there was some flexibility there with a nursing career, a lot of different avenues I could have chosen, and I could work part-time. Okay. And so that, it ended up being the best decision I could have ever made. And then through my nursing career, I didn't know I would use it so much in my writing. My previous book, Raising the Bottom, was all about women and alcoholism and men. And I did a whole chapter to doctors, nurses, and healthcare, because that's a whole different show. I could go on and on about what a horror show it still is. I mean, what happened to my mother back in the 60s with the misdiagnosing and the medicating is still going on today. It is so shameful. It is a disaster. Yeah. And doctors, they're not training them with addiction. They're still not. It's just really sad.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic.
Right.
Yeah. I'm curious though, when you say that, you sort of prioritized your spirituality, came back to faith, what drove you that direction?
Well, I understood I was not going to stay sober without something way bigger than me to help me. And I think that's why many people do struggle in addiction, is they're not willing to let go. They're not willing to trust. I mean, they call it a higher power. I call it God, Jesus Christ. That is my higher power. But there are people that get sober at least believing in some spirit, that they can't define God, but they do grab on to some spiritual aspects. So there was really no choice. I knew that, and I started having very early in recovery, I had a beautiful dream of Jesus on the cross and the whole crucifixion and resurrection type thing. And I knew I was on the right path. Wow. That was so like powerful. And I've had many spiritual experiences that, and my spiritual practice, we have a monastery about 4 hours from me where Thomas Merton, the famous monk, was. It's the Trappist Monastery in Bard, Kentucky. And so I go there by myself and do silent retreats and things like that. I worked very hard on my spirituality and sought out experiences to just be alone with me and God, because I knew that I need to not so much figure it out, but I need to align myself with God. And I think for all of us, it is a journey and it takes some work. And I think God does meet us, but I think we have to put in the footwork. For me, it's not been an instantaneous, oh, I feel so spiritual. It's not been like that at all. It's been a lot of work looking at my character defects, looking at, when I was drinking. I mean, most addicts and alcoholics are incredibly selfish, self-centered. I had to be rid of that. And my ego had to be smashed. Yeah. That I had to quit being self-reliant.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's all scriptural, denial of self, laying down our pride. I'm curious, have you ever had a sense of God pursuing you?
I think I've had moments of it. Sometimes I feel like, here's like an example. It was kind of woo-woo, but along this sobriety journey at some point, it's easy to, my husband drinks. I mean, I'm around alcohol. And after this many years, it's not hard to start minimizing how it was, because like I said, I never had a DUI. I never went to jail. There was nothing dramatic. So you can start playing in your mind, and I think that is the devil, that, well, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. Maybe I could drink again. And this happened, and weird things. All of a sudden, a song, I heard it, audibly heard it, and it was I forget the exact name of the song, but what I heard, the lyrics that I heard, the actual song playing, was The High Cost of Getting High. It's a country song. Yeah. And it was very odd. I'm like, no, where did that come from? So I look at my phone, like, okay, did I hit Spotify nothing? So I've had moments like that where I feel like God's directly, here's what's my thoughts and is going, and he was like, nope, that kind of thing. I've had those experiences where I feel like God disciplines me. And sometimes I don't like it, because I feel like other people get away with all kinds of things. He does not let me get away with anything. I mean, really, nothing.
I mean, that's a sign of love, and not discipline in the punishing sense, but in the keeping you within the bounds of safety.
I think so. Sometimes I don't like it, though. Sometimes I want to go out.
We all do, yeah.
But he doesn't let me do that. So it's...
Let me ask you this. Has there been a point where you moved from being Lisa Boucher, someone who is struggling to stay sober, or successfully staying sober, I don't want to put that on you, but someone who is trying to have a deeper faith and moved, this is really a question about identity, to someone who realizes that I'm a daughter of the King. I am a daughter of the Most High. I am chosen by Him. I am loved by Him. I am forgiven. For, as far as the East is from the West, all the things, the places where I've missed the mark, what the original meaning of the word sin, where I've just missed it. I am loved and accepted, and there's no place I can go to escape His love for me. Has that realization really hit you?
I think that realization has been creeping up on me the last 2, 3 years. And I think that's why I'm shifting my message somewhat, in that I've always felt like God has forgiven me, because I really look back, like I said, I didn't have my kids, so I didn't hurt a lot of people with my drinking. It was more I hurt myself.
Sure.
Because I know a lot of people struggle with guilt with their kids and that. And I didn't have that, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
But I am starting to realize that here's what God was putting on my heart, that he wants to use everyday people like you and me to stand up for God. I feel like there has been so much God bashing in the world. Christianity is going down. I'm sick of it. And I just feel this righteous, like God is putting in me, you need to start speaking up, instead of, for a while there, everything is you don't want to say anything because you don't want to offend anyone. And now I think God is saying, no, I need people to be bold.
Yeah.
And I need people to stop worrying about offending these people who are hating me, and drowning out that I am love and mercy and want to save and help anybody. I mean, God can resurrect. And I don't think we see miracles, but boy, in recovery rooms, I see miracles every day.
Sure.
I see people that are complete wrecks of a human being. And then, in fact, I had an experience just last month. I was at a very 6 a.m. meeting that I don't normally go to, but one of my sponsees wanted her token. And there was a young man there, and he's all buff, and he's talking, and I'm thinking, boy, I know him. He looks so familiar. And then when he said his name, I almost fell over. He was the same young man that a year and a half before I had been at a meeting, and he looked like he just came off the streets. He had been on heroin. He had been on meth. He had nothing. He was homeless. And he's talking about he now has a home, and he's got a new baby on the way, and he's employed. And I could not believe it was the same person. That is a miracle that we don't get to see. Most people don't.
Yeah, no, and that's God's nature. He makes order from the chaos. He breathes life where there is death. And yeah, you're right. We need to let people know that. Yeah, because really, I mean, unless we get off into the condemnation, which Scripture says there's no condemnation in Christ. John 3:17 says Jesus came to the world not to condemn the world, but the world through him might be saved. When we get into that message, it's a message of hope. And we all need hope. And certainly that's what you sensed when you were searching is the hope. And you moved towards that. And it's led, the fruit from that is good, because it always is when God's involved. Lisa, I appreciate your stance and your journey, sharing your journey, because it is a journey, and it looks a little different for all of us. But you're right. God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will, if we will just, as you say in subtitle, surrender to him.
That is it.
All right. Last word from you. Here's the book, Pray, Trust, Ride by Lisa Boucher. If you're interested in just some of the things she's been through and the lessons she's learned, and the romanticism of the Old West is still out there. It's beautiful. I love it out there. I'll be out there soon. But what do you want people to walk away with? Your bottom line message, what would it be?
That letting go. It's all about the letting go. I think people struggle. They want to micromanage. They want to push the river, and it just is causing so much angst and anxiety. And I think if we really sit back and understand how little we do control, the things that really matter in life, we don't control the big things. So to let go and trust God more, really try to make that a daily practice of, I'm going to let go of these things. And that doesn't mean we do nothing,
right? But
we cannot plan the outcome. We do the footwork and let God be in charge of the results.
Yeah, and that's a great posture to be in, no matter where you are in your journey. That surrender, it's a daily surrender. And Lisa, I appreciate you doing that. I want to show you her website. It is lisaboucherauthor.com. And it looks, there it is, like that. And you can read more about her and her other books. And pick up Pray, Trust, Right. It's available wherever you get books. Appreciate you being with us. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.